Hello, everybody, and welcome back to more Warcry. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the Mawpit. I've got mine here. There we go. It is a massive piece of terrain. Comes in the Hunter and Hunted box. It's really cool. A lot of people have a lot of problems trying to put it together because it's got all sorts of weird molding issues. But that's not what we're going to be talking about today. Today, we're going to be talking about the terrain itself. We're going to be talking about how to use it. We're going to be talking about different miniatures that might have synergies with the terrain, its abilities, special twist cards that come with it, special terrain setups that come with it, and everything else besides. This is a patron requested video, so thank you very much for your support. If you want to be able to suggest videos yourself, you can join me with the links down below. You can either join me via YouTube as a member, you can join me through Patreon, or if that's not something you're interested in, you can go and you can check out Streamlabs and you can give me some support that way. Either way, if this is the kind of thing that you like and you want to see more of it, please don't forget to like and subscribe so I can make more of the content that you want to see. But without further ado, let's get going. Let's check out the Mawpit. The Mawpit itself, I've already said it comes in the Hunter and Hunted box, along with the Gorger Moorpack and the Wilder Corpse Hunters. It really comprises of a bunch of different terrain pieces kind of glued together. We've got the platform, we've got the bone struts, we've got the Mawpit itself, and we've got the rubble going around it. It's got a bunch of different special rules. The bone struts are obstacles, the Mawpit is a platform, you've got low terrain on all of the area sitting around the Mawpit, so you'll be able to go over that easily. And the teeth of the Mawpit itself is classed as deadly terrain. So if you decide to go through it or across it, you will start to take damage as you try and scramble across. If the Mawpit is around, fighters can use the Get Into the Pit ability and the Desperate Gambit reactions. We're going to be taking a look at that just in a moment. At the end of your activation, if your fighter finds himself in the unlucky position that he is sitting on the Mawpit itself, so on the platform, he automatically dies because the Mawpit will basically eat you. It's the most hungry piece of terrain after the Gnarlwoods themselves. And then we have an additional rule. If you are playing a campaign game, that fighter gets to add 1 to its renown rolls, and you also gain +1 glory. So a pretty interesting piece. If you are playing in campaigns, the platform itself will give you the ability to make your fighters better more quickly. The Mawpit itself, I've already said, it has 2 abilities. The first one we're going to be looking at is the triple Get Into the Pit. After the next melee attack action made by this fighter in this activation that targets a fighter with a lower wounds characteristic that's on the skull platform or within 1 inch horizontally of the maw, you roll a dice and add the strength characteristic of that attack action to the result. If the result is 8 or more, the target fighter is taken down. And then secondly, we have a reaction, Desperate Gambit. The fighter can make the reaction after they've been targeted by a melee attack, but before hit rolls are made. If they're standing on the skull platform or within 1 inch horizontally of the maw, if each hit roll from that attack action is a miss, then the attack is taken down. Otherwise, the fighter who uses Desperate Gambit is taken down themselves. I've put a diagram here to show you these kind of radiuses. Everything in red is where you are able to use Get Into the Pit or Desperate Gambit. So really the effects of the Mawpit are kind of consigned to the immediate area of the Mawpit itself, unless of course you're standing on top of the skull platform. Something interesting about the Get Into the Pit ability is that it doesn't require the attack action that you make with your triple to actually hit. All you need to do is target a fighter with a lower wounds characteristic than the fighter that's using it. So potentially that opens up tactics where you might have high strength, high wound fighters. They might be standing on top of the skull platform or within range of the Mawpit itself. And as long as they are able to roll that 8 or more, they can basically take down any target that might come into combat range with them. Now, the question is, why would you even do this? If you're playing a game and you have the Mawpit in the game, surely what it would lead to is a situation where lower wound fighters especially just wouldn't go anywhere near the Mawpit. But the thing is, it's a huge piece of terrain. You can see it here, just how much space it takes up on your typical board. So if a fighter wanted to go around the Mawpit, it's a lot of movement. So I think just by virtue of being so big, it almost forces you and your opponent to deal with it, unless you are in a warband just full of fast flyers that can fly over it and fly across it without any penalty. The Mawpit itself, in the Hunter and Hunted box, it does come with a specific twist. Roaring Mawpit is its name. If there's no Mawpit on the battlefield, you can draw another twist card, but fighters within 3 inches of the Mawpit cannot use abilities or make reactions. Now, I find this a bit of an odd twist to have with the Mawpit, because the Mawpit specifically gives you actions and reactions specifically for being near it, and that's really the most flavorful thing of the model. Whereas Roaring Mawpit almost just effectively just makes it a big piece of probably dangerous terrain that's sitting in the middle or off to the side of the battlefield. So I think it kind of takes a little bit of fun out of using the Mawpit itself, really, because if you're going to be using a piece of terrain and you're going to be bringing it specifically for the rules it has, now in Warcry, a lot of the terrain itself actually does have special rules, but just no one uses it. But something like the Mawpit that you'd be bringing for that, I wouldn't tend to include the Roaring Mawpit twist in my twist deck, because if you're using the twists anyway, you're kind of playing a little bit more fun as opposed to a proper, like, full-blown match play game. I'd want to use all of my terrain with all of the abilities that they come with. You do get also a number of terrain setups that come with the Mawpit. You can see the kind of thing that they're going for. I would think that if you were going to use the Roaring Mawpit twist, probably the top left and center would be the ones that you would be using for that, just because the Mawpit's out of the way anyway, so you're unlikely to engage with it. Whereas the other 4, I think, would be better suited to just using all of the rules, really, so that you kind of get that sense of, yes, I'm fighting in and around this terrain piece, and trying to get the most out of it as you can. One thing that I do want to say is that all of the terrain layouts are all scales of Talaxis. I've got a picture of that here. It also comes with the special Talaxis board, which does include the swamp tiles. So if we imagine we're going to be using the Warpit specifically with scales of Talaxis, you've got the swamp terrain board rules. So the swamp boards are -1 strength and toughness for any fighters that are wholly within the swamp. It really gives you a very lethal board layout, especially if you're using all of the special rules of the terrain. You've got the Scales of Talaxis Troves, you've got the Gnarlbriar, which does damage if you go over it, you've got the Pylons, which can be used to damage people, you've got the Elden Gnarloak, which will eat people, and you've got the Mawpit itself, which will try and swallow people whole. Now, normally I'm all for proper match play games, but I think if you are going to be using this, it gives a very interesting dimension to your games where you have to try and play around the terrain just as much as playing around your opponents. So that's something that could be pretty cool whilst you're playing. What I do want to say about the Scales of Talaxis and the Mawpit and Hunter and Hunted itself, because these terrain cards are in here and there is a specific Mawpit twist, and it's specifically for Scales of Talaxis as opposed to the normal Heart of Gur Sundered Fate terrain. We had the idea before that there was going to be a second season of Warcry, and it would be wholly different terrain, and we'd be seeing some other stuff. And the rumor going about the internet is that the second season was basically split up into multiple boxes to try and spread that out. That's kind of why in the last quarter of the year, we had something like 4 Warband releases and the Scales of Talaxis box and the double Warband box all condensed into a very small amount of time. So this kind of adds credence to that idea that maybe Hunter and Hunted and the Scales of Talaxis box were actually what the new box set would have looked like. So you've got the Scales terrain, you've got the Mawpit in there, you've got the additional terrain cards, and you've got the additional twist. Possibly that might have been the direction that Games Workshop were going, but it seems like now that they've split everything up, you can buy everything separately. Scales of Talaxis itself, I really like as a terrain set. I think it's much more complete as a terrain set than something like Sundered Fate or Bloodhunt or any of those other boxes there. But yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on what I think would have happened should we have got a proper second season of Warcry. As to some kind of fighters that would work pretty well with the Mawpit, I think what we're going to be looking at are fighters that can manipulate movement, so ones that can force your opponent to get within range of the Mawpits, you're able to use those triples and use your reaction to kind of throw them in and insta-kill them, or possibly pull them into the Mawpit itself so they automatically die by being on top of it at the end of the turn. Or alternatively, fighters with very large wound pools, and possibly even high strength. Come to think of it, after I wrote this, given that you only need to roll an 8+ with the triple to kill your opponent if they have lower wounds than you, it's still very much within the realms of reason that something like a Spirit Host, for example. A Spirit Host has a chunk of wounds, but it's only got strength 3. But when you're going to be rolling your dice, the ability effectively just says, declare your target, and on a strength 3 model, if you roll a 5 or more, you automatically kill whatever it is that you're fighting. You want things with a very large wound pool, ideally very high strength. Something like the Tyrant here, it only has to roll a 2 or more to insta-kill things. My problem with high wound and high strength fighters is that they're going to have a huge damage profile to go with them. The Tyrant in this case is 4/8, so it's very likely that he's basically going to kill whatever he's fighting anyway, unless we're talking about him going wrestling a Chimera around the Mawpit, using his triple, rolling his 2 or more, and then throwing a Chimera in to get eaten. Unless we're talking about that situation, I don't necessarily think you need super high strength along with the wounds. You only really need a high enough wound pool that you can beat out most of your opponent's fighters. Most bespoke heroes are only 20 wounds in themselves, so it doesn't take a whole lot more to get a few more wounds than them to be able to make use out of that triple. It's important to mention also that you will be playing a mission to go with this. So, for example, you might have objective missions where the objectives are placed in such a way that they force you to interact with the Mawpit just because they're so close. Or you might be playing treasure missions where you have to go to the Mawpit to pick up treasure. So I think that's something else to bear in mind if you're planning on using this terrain. And again, just because of how big it is, it will, if it's in a central or maybe off-center position on the battlefield, almost force you to come and interact with it. The question that we had, and the main question that was actually asked during my Patreon, was casual or competitive play. I think it depends heavily on the standardization of terrain. And when I say that, I mean, if we look at Kill Team for an example, and we take that as kind of the basis of where we can go with terrain rules, every single Kill Team board has terrain pieces with their own special rules. And when you go to tournaments, those special rules are used because they're baked into the board and it bakes into how they play. Warcry is kind of not like that because it doesn't have standard terrain layouts that you're going to be using for your competitive play. If you're going to be using something like the Mawpit along with its special rules, it almost gives certain warbands advantages and disadvantages, and gives certain mission types advantages and disadvantages just by it being there. Like I said, it's huge, so it forces you to interact with it. That being said, pretty much all of the Heart of Gur terrain itself does have special rules anyway. Even looking at something like the rope bridges have a rule whereby you can cut them and you can take down the rope bridge, which will cause people on the bridge to fall off. That's something that's very basic, but it's hardly ever used in competitive play. And if it is used, most people don't even, either they don't remember it or they don't think about it during their games. So I think if we're talking about using the Mawpit and using our terrain with different special rules in a competitive sense, you would almost need set terrain layouts where the terrain itself does matter, because otherwise all you're doing is just putting a big old impassable piece of terrain on the battlefield. It does have those kind of insta-kill abilities to it, and no one really likes that if you're playing in a tournament, for example, everything hinging on one dice roll. Oh, I rolled my 5+, your guy is dead. It's not something that is amazingly popular, and it's extremely swingy, which is kind of one of the criticisms of Warcry in itself, that the game can be really swingy with the hits and the crits. So just adding an additional layer on top of that, where your guy can just fall over and die if they get eaten, I don't think is something that we generally want to see. That's it from me for today. Thank you very much for watching. This was a Patreon request, so if you guys want to put some requests in for yourself, and you want to have a say as to the kind of content that I am making, of course, you can join my Patreon. As I said before, please do not forget to like and subscribe if you want me to continue making more content like this. And let me know down in the comments section below what you think about the Mawpit. I know at least one person in our community is planning on building and painting 5 of them, so they can effectively cover the entire board, which I think will be kind of wild to play. Let us know what you think about it, what you think about the Warcry terrain rules in themselves, if you think they have a place in match play, or if you think that they should be strictly consigned to narrative play. That's all something very interesting that I'd like to hear. But again, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.